This is the Professional Hypnotherapists Podcast, session number 0013. Dr. Pradeep Chadha, the Drugless Psychiatrist. Welcome to the Professional Hypnotherapists Podcast, a production of the European Association of Professional Hypnotherapists. That's eaph.ie. A very warm welcome to you to this edition of the Professional Hypnotherapist Podcast. I'm your host, Aidan Noon. Dr. Pradeep Chadha, the drugless psychiatrist, has been in practice in Ireland since the early 90s. In this podcast, you will hear Dr. Chadha reveal the real truth about therapy and therapies. We gain an insight into his method of practice, revealing an holistic and person-centered intervention. We hear about what influences the therapeutic outcome, and he discusses the politics at play in the therapy world. We talk about trauma, stress, and depression. Would you like to know the real truth about diabetes? Well, listen now and learn from probably one of the most experienced and sought-after mental health professional experts, Dr. Pradeep Kumar Chadha, the drugless psychiatrist. Dr. Pradeep Chadha, welcome to the Professional Hypnotherapist Podcast.
Thank you, Aaron, for the invite.
You describe the services that you provide as drugless psychiatry, or in modern day terms, integrative psychiatry. Perhaps you could expand on that for us, please.
Yeah, it may sound like a paradox, but drugless psychiatry is without drugs. And integrative psychiatry is integrating all the knowledge that we have. And that knowledge also includes a knowledge of medicine, psychiatric drugs or psychotropic drugs. So psychotropic drugs, herbs, nutritional supplements, hypnosis, hypnotherapy, and everything that we can use, basically. In a more elaborate, expanded format of practice, I'm also involved with a group in which we make use of allied services, including massage, including acupuncture, including gym, including sound therapy, and combine it into a very powerful combination. In actual fact, this kind of service is provided in Switzerland, in some of the most expensive addiction clinics in the world. So I use all of it in whatever manner I can.
So it's very much an holistic approach. And in terms of what the client brings to therapy, Dr. Chadha, to what extent does what the client brings to therapy have an effect on the outcome of therapy? Or what major part, or does it play a major part in therapy? If I'm making sense in what I'm saying.
You are making perfect sense, Aidan. And it's a very important question that you ask. And there's a lot of controversy about what the therapist brings in and what the patient brings in. One of the classical things about this particular kind of knowledge with regards to therapy is missing, which is about what the client brings. I have an old research paper from a journal that used to be published many years ago. I think it is no longer being published. It was called The Therapist. It was published in the UK. And I have this cutting of this article somewhere in my archives, which states that, according to one research that is published there, about in therapy, 40% of the impact of therapy is what the client brings to the table. So it is literally half if you look at it. 50% is half, 40% is less than half. So the major part of the contribution of the impact of therapy is what the client brings. 30% is what the therapist brings as his or her personality. So the relationship between the client and the therapist is 70%. The rest of the 30% are the techniques and all that. Now, yeah, the interesting thing is that when things go wrong, you read a lot about what the therapist did wrong in literature or in the news item or what went wrong in therapy and blame therapist for whatever has happened. You very rarely hear of what the client did or what the client has been doing. We are living in a consumer society, so whoever pays has the upper hand. So the client pays, and the therapist is always at a disadvantage because no one asks the therapist of what the issues could have been. If things go wrong, is the therapist or the therapy to be blamed? Whereas literally half of the impact of any therapy or therapeutic process is the responsibility of the client.
And also through your work, Dr. Chadha, and experience, you are enabled to innovate, discover, and develop some of the simplest and most powerful techniques that are evidence based. And how important is evidence based therapy?
Yes, evidence based is important, but to be honest, I do not understand what evidence based means. If, as Michael Corey, who is since deceased, was a very good friend of mine. He was a very prominent psychiatrist, and as he used to say, if one pig can fly, then all pigs can fly. So basically speaking, what is possible to do with one client is possible to do with the other client, and as a result of which you can have very powerful, very simple techniques, which, in my view and experience, because I've worked with probably thousands of clients by this time, I have found that when you are working with human physiology, how the body works, once you know how the body works, the science behind it, the physiology behind it, any therapist can become an innovator because the body follows certain principles. And once you know how those principles operate and what they are, you can modulate them and change the implication according to your usage. And that's exactly what I've been doing. So the things that I do are very simple. For example, there's a hand pressing exercise. One of my student therapists um, has gone online and taught something called as a hand pressing. I call it as a hand pressing exercise. And he gives me the feedback that what he has learned from hundreds of clients of his, or even not even clients, people who have seen that exercise online, everywhere in the world, they have given him feedback which is quite astounding. And it's a very simple exercise. So you can do wonders with very, very simple things, provided you know how to do them.
So, what I'm hearing from you, Dr. Chadha, is that it really doesn't have to be that difficult or complicated. For example, you place great emphasis on guided imagery and focused attention. Perhaps you'd speak more on that for us.
True, focused attention is the definition of hypnosis according to Milton Erickson, which is very interesting. But one of the most interesting things that I have learned of while working in psychiatry and then psychotherapy is the politics that runs in all professions, including mental health and including psychotherapies. I do not know how many of your audience is adhering to one of the I would call accredited therapies. But what I have noticed over the years is that so-called accredited therapies like CBT, rational motive therapy, psychoanalysis, humanistic type, they have their own politics and they do not entertain or let the word hypnosis slip into it. They, they they literally hate, in my view, as I've seen it, maybe I'm wrong, they literally hate the word hypnosis if it's put into place. Whereas some of the most powerful therapy techniques are hypnotherapeutic techniques. Even in behavioral therapy and CBT, the exposure technique is a very typical hypnotherapy technique. No one uses the word hypnosis in it. Exposure therapy gets a lot of kudos for what it is, and everyone claps with CBT. As far as hypnosis is concerned, hypnosis, oh, what's hypnosis? And and this is the norm everywhere. So there is politics everywhere, and that's the reason why you you and many other people would ask a question: why is it that what I do is not very well known? Yes, I've deliberately made it so. I hate these kinds of politics. I have had the occasion and the opportunity to to tell the world what can be done or what is possible to be done. But believe me, the kind of response I got as a result of that, it was not very pleasurable or not very happy, and some people did not like what I was doing or what I was saying because I was making things very easy.
I suppose it's a case of protecting the institution at all costs. And to what extent, as it were, but as we are in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic and we're now dealing with the Omicron variant of it, to what extent does a virus or an illness or a sickness or whatever, or stress, to what extent all of that contribute or does it have an effect on our immune system?
It's a very interesting question you ask, Aiden. When we talk of immune system, very interestingly, immune system is not only relevant from our physical health perspective, immune system is also relevant from our mental health perspective. Over the last few decades, rather 1 or 1.5 decades, a lot of talk has started to come up with regard to how inflammatory processes can cause, for example, depression. And how obviously when inflammatory processes are going on in the body, they are they are producing, the body is producing inflammatory chemicals in the body. And depression is being touted as one of the phenomenon that happens when the body goes through oxidative stress. But the same principle also applies to lowering or weakening of the immune system, because inflammatory processes also weaken the new immune system that cause a body, a physical body, a human being, to be more prone to have physical illnesses. So you now have a situation in which science is coming to a point where it's starting to acknowledge that the oxidative stresses or a hit to the immune system not only causes physical problems but also causes mental problems. And currently, I was reading a paper the other day with regard to Alzheimer's. Even Alzheimer's is an organic, what we call as an organic condition, which in which brain damage is caused in the brain, is now starting to be acknowledged as an inflammatory process. So the body's inflammation causes the production of these elements, if I may use the word, very simple terms, not going scientifically, that cause Alzheimer's disease. So Alzheimer's disease and other organic disorders, other dementias as well, they are now known to be caused by inflammatory processes. So you have inflammatory processes causing a lowering of the immune system, causing mental illness, causing physical illness. So is it then a surprise then a small quantity of virus creates havoc in the world, because people who were highly stressed out had oxidative stress going on in the body, inflammatory processes going on in the body, with weakening of the immune system, having being caught up with this particular virus. And those who didn't have the virus, because they were confined into closed spaces, they had difficulty coping with those closed spaces. And because of the tension and the inflammatory process in the body, well, that's one way to look at it. They started to have conditions which we call as mental conditions. I have another explanation for why it happens other than the oxidative stress. For that, it is important to understand how the body absorbs trauma, how the body absorbs stress. There are two very popular books currently out in the market. One written by Geber Mate, When the Body Says No, and the other is by a psychiatrist called Basil van der Kolk. The title of the book is, I think, something to do with score. I'm not remembering the exact name. Yeah. So these two books are saying the same thing. They are talking about the immune system being compromised by the body holding on to a lot of stress, and that stress is as if it's being absorbed by the body. As long as the stress is absorbed by the body continues to be in a high state of tension with a lowered immune system, and you are inviting trouble.
To what extent does a autoimmune condition play or have a role in all of this?
Well, autoimmune condition happens firstly because the immune system gets a beating. The immune system is hit hard. And it's also related to the weight, by the way. When people gain weight, when they are not looking after themselves, when they gain weight, then the body tends to become, I would say, overwhelmed with fatty tissue. So when it has more fatty tissue than it needs, then those fatty tissue, they start to behave like, and now we know that, to behave like a hormonal system of its own. And that hormonal system starts to produce inflammatory chemicals. And those inflammatory chemicals, they tend to be responsible for the autoimmune response. The body starts to fight against its own tissue, and you have problems. With all the research and all the understanding that I've had, and the reading that I have done and practically seen, the best way to live by, in my view, needs to incorporate some form of physical exercise and some form of meditation forever, every day.
That sounds a very healthy prescription. Is there anything else that we ideally need to be doing?
The first thing is you need to sleep well as well. In some quarters on the internet, I read about a person should not be sleeping too much, or they should be sleeping less than blah hours a day. At the end of the day, each person's sleep cycle is their own. Some people do well with 6 hours, some people can do very well with seven, and most of the people do very well with 8 hours. Sleep is half the healing. If you are not sleeping well, you are causing a lot of problem to your body and to your mind. You are actually increasing body stress. You are lowering down your immune system. I don't have the statistics with me, but I read a few years ago that almost all the accidents, a very high percentage, now I would say all, a very, very high percentage of road traffic accidents in Ireland, they happen because people have not slept well and they're sleeping on the wheel.
I actually recall reading about that, the statistic.
Thank you. So sleep is one, eating good food is another, and eating good food, even if we um, do not take into consideration the climate change and all that, even despite that, a good diet usually incorporates a lot of fruits and vegetables, and meat is not necessarily an integral part of a good diet. Now, that might sound controversial, but I was just watching a program only yesterday on television, and we were watching a program on an Indian channel, and there was this Bollywood hunk, very well built young man who is a very well known actor. And the anchor asked him the question, "What is his diet?" And he says, "I'm a total vegetarian." And if you see his body, he's very well built. So for those people who say, he's one example, but for those people who say that proteins are only to be found in meat, I think they need to reconsider and revisit the whole protein issue. Because in India, literally half of the population doesn't eat meat.
What's the fallout as a result of someone who may have had COVID and recovered in terms of their mental health?
I have read that there's a lot of mental issues that tend to come up when people suffer with COVID, and it's not only COVID that does that. In actual fact, any kind of physical illness will cause depression or anxiety. It's very commonly known in medical circles that a person with cancer can have anxiety and depression, and it's widespread. People with diabetes will have depression. So it's not exclusive to COVID. But when you are physically ill, your whole body's energy is geared towards healing you physically. And obviously, that drains the nervous system. And it, I wouldn't say it causes depression. Depression happens only, in my view, when people tend to have a lot of locked up traumatic emotional issues that they can't get rid of. Otherwise, human body is quite capable to quickly handle any emotion and come out of it fast. But if it lingers on, well, then the person had, and people usually have, issues that they have never addressed, or they trivialize, or they say, well, it happened, but it was not important, or I have dealt with it. But the body hasn't. And here is the importance of the books that I stated. The body knows the score, or something like that. That's what Bessel van der Kolk book is like.
You are the author of two books, the first being The Stress Barrier, and the second one is The Road to a Happy Life. What motivated you to write The Stress Barrier?
Well, the first one was basically written at a time when I was very excited about what I was learning about human body and mind. And what I had learned at that time were that the emotional health, and I say to all my clients, that your emotional health determines your health overall. If you're emotionally healthy, you will be physically and mentally healthy. And what does emotional health mean? You are able to deal with day to day life stresses and strains and come out of it quickly without leaving any or holding any emotional baggage behind. And that simply means if there are times when you need to grieve, you come out of it quickly. When there are times when you feel angry, you feel angry, You express it in whatever manner you do, and you come out of it, and the matter ends. If you feel happy about something, you are not over the moon, all right, but you feel happy, and you can also process it and come out of it quickly if and when the need is there. So there is a sort of an emotional flexibility there. All psychiatric conditions, functional psychiatric conditions, if I may call, in which people are suffering a lot, happen because of the emotional inflexibility. So people become emotionally stuck on something. It could be the loss of a near and dear one, it could be anger or trauma regarding anything. And anything can be major, anything can be minor. It's very interesting that some people who are suffering with trauma and depression or anxiety or whatever you may name it, they don't want to give up on what they are holding on to. And that compounds their suffering. So all emotional healing is about letting go. And that is what emotional health is all about. So that was when I wrote the first book. And the idea of writing the first book was to challenge people to think and find answers for themselves about what I had written in the book, which was about emotions. The fascinating thing was I learned a lesson that people don't want to ask questions themselves or explore things themselves. They want ready-made answers in the books. And my book did not give any ready-made answers. I'm sorry about it.
Talk to us now about your second book, The Road to a Happy Life.
Yeah, that is a very interesting book again. I've actually given all the techniques that I use more or less in that book of what I have used successfully over the years. Um, Again, it was an experimental book. I wanted to see how people would respond, and interesting for me, it just went over the head of the people. I don't know for what reason, but that was the reason I wrote the book because it has almost all the techniques I've used or I'm using. It's out of print, and I don't know whether there are copies available, so I'm not sure.
Tell us what your approach is to a client when they present to you with trauma.
Trauma, trauma is a very interesting concept in human life because everyone goes through traumatic experiences. Some people go through not major traumas, some people go through very minor traumas, but everyone experiences trauma. And in my view, the definition of trauma is that firstly it happens suddenly. Trauma happens suddenly. It's not expected. It happens suddenly. It's not expected. It is unpleasant, and the person wants to either, well, most likely the person wants to do away with it, avoid it, run away from it. So you feel angry or you feel fear. And the fourth thing that happens is that in almost all the cases in which there is trauma involved or trauma experience, the person holds on to the emotional impact of it. The person doesn't let go of the emotional impact. And that is what causes the trauma doing a damaging impact or having a damaging impact long run.
What do you say to a client who says, "Well, I'm not holding on to anything"?
Okay, I simply ask them to do one simple exercise. I ask them to close their eyes and remember that particular trauma that they are talking about, that they think or they feel is no longer relevant, and run through the trauma in their own mind. And then I ask them to open their eyes and ask them about their feelings. Most of the time, they have feelings which are very strong, which are either of fear or of anger. And if the emotions of fear and anger are still carried by them in their body, a long time after that trauma has ended, well then, the trauma may have ended time-wise, but in their body the trauma is still alive. And that's a classical example that trauma is still affecting them. Now, why does that happen? Sorry. It happens because if we, as we read in hypnosis, there is an unconscious mind. The unconscious mind was supposed to be a Freudian term at one stage, but now with neurosciences we know that there is a part of the brain that is called as the limbic system, which is actually the seat of the unconscious, if you may call it that way. And this unconscious has the ability, as Freud would have said, to defend or to make the organism survive. Now, we also need to understand that the cognitive mind, the reasonable, logical mind, which neuroscientists say is encased in our prefrontal lobe, is also there actively trying to defend the organism. So you have this trauma, the unconscious mind gets aroused, the conscious mind says, be quiet, shut up, and don't respond, don't react. So you now have a situation in which one part of the nervous system is saying, I don't want to see it, and the other part of the system is saying, well, it's fearful. I don't like it, but it's fearful. And you now have a battle going on within the body between so-called unconscious and the conscious. And what happens as a result? The body gets roused. The whole body starts to prepare itself for fight or flee. So the blood pressure goes up, cholesterol levels go up, blood glucose becomes high, and so on and so forth. The problem with trauma is if it's short-lived and it can be processed quickly, that's fine. But if this battle between the cognitive and the unconscious mind carries on, you now have a situation in which your blood glucose and your blood cholesterol are going to be raised perpetually. You now have a health problem. When I was reading in medical school, in Davidson's book of medicine, there was a small sentence which stated that diabetes is triggered by stress. At that time, a lot of emphasis, or rather 100% of emphasis, was on family history of diabetes. It's only recently, very, very recently, that the doctors have awakened to the fact that trauma triggers the diabetes. You may have a family history of diabetes, but having a family history of diabetes is not a guarantee that you are going to have diabetes. It's the trauma that goes on in your life or something that has happened that has triggered the diabetes. And very recently, I've heard a patient of mine say that his diabetologist has said to him, you can come off these drugs if you look after yourself properly. I was surprised pleasantly and quite pleased with what was being said to him, because till a few years ago, people were being told that diabetes could never be cured without medication. And once you are on these tablets, well, you take them for the rest of your life and there is no way out of it.
Thank you for that, Dr. Chadha. Please talk to us now about depression.
Well, I'll speak in general terms. There are so many new different types of medications being discovered every day, which is interesting, phenomenal, and astounding as well. But at the end of the day, as hypnotherapists and therapists in general, people do know that our body has its own pharmacy. There's actually a book on body's pharmacy. And to be very honest with you, the body has its own pharmacy. But because no No one gives money for this pharmacy. No one charges money for this pharmacy. No one makes money out of it. Obviously, no one in the medical system, very few people in the medical system, are prepared to talk about it or are prepared to promote it. In one of the things that I have found in medical practice over the years is that almost all the medical doctors who have tried to look at things slightly differently have either been hounded out of the profession or have been marked as someone who were insane or who were out of their mind. And this has not happened with one, but each and every doctor that I have come across, that I've heard of, that I've known of, who has tried to explain that there are body's abilities to do things as well, which are, if not better, at least at par with how medication works. So antidepressants work on the principle that they all, no matter where, even if there are newer ones that will be found, they are all blocking your nervous system. They are all blocking your emotional expression. They numb you emotionally. That's that's what they do. So when a person comes off medication after 6 months or a year, many times there is a rebound effect, and the person becomes depressed again. So they have to be given antidepressant again. Now, that happens because the trauma that is involved underlying the depression, or the anger, or the fear that is there, that needs to be expressed and dissipated and processed, just stays in the body. And the medication simply numbs that impact. So the moment you take the medication out of the equation, it happens again. And that's how antidepressants work. And all of them work like that, irrespective of whether they are modern, whether they're ketamine or brexanolone or whatever new drugs that have come up. It does not matter, or the more that will be coming out. All of them suppress and numb emotions. And all hypnosis and hypnotherapeutic processes, no matter what they involve, they all bring up the trauma that the depression is a result of. I remember reading Dr. Gibson's book. No, there's a book that I have, an old book on hypnosis by Waxman, and it is very categorically stated in that book. It's an old book that you don't do hypnosis with people with depression and with psychosis. Well, to be honest with you, Aidan, I do it on a daily basis because times have changed. We have learned so much. And yes, if done properly, hypnosis is, in my view, the most powerful tool, whether you call it placebo effect or whatever, that can be used to heal human mind and human body.
Thank you, Dr. Chadha. What is it about hypnosis that makes it so special? What is that secret elixir?
The elixir of hypnosis is that the moment you close your eyes, you actually go, as meditators would say, you go in your inner self. So the moment you close your eyes, you actually open doors to your inside. And for people who are very, very busy, who are very, very busy in their day-to-day material life, when they close their eyes, what runs in their mind at that time are all the thoughts about the present and the future and the work that they have to do today and tomorrow and day after and a week later and down the month. And that's what runs in their mind, because that is what their inner mind is all about. So the elixir is the inner mind. The moment your inner mind becomes clean, thought free, trauma free, fear, anger free, your immune system kicks in. You can go through any kind of endemics and epidemics. The likelihood of you having infections will actually be quite low because your immune system is strong. That's the elixir of hypnosis.
Dr. Chadha, what is your advice to any hypnotherapist out there who a client may present to them who is on medication?
It entirely depends on their experience of hypnosis, of psychiatric medication, and their own training and qualification. I would suggest that for those who are not familiar with psychiatric drugs, that you don't tamper or try to tamper the drugs or advise people to come off them. You can still work with people on medication, but without changing any medication or asking them to reduce their medication or not take their medication. Don't do that. Let them continue to be on medication. You can still work with them with hypnosis, but be careful. Hypnosis relaxes people most of the time because it acts on the parasympathetic system. And when people are on medication, they are highly stressed out. Their sympathetic tone, their sympathetic response is very strong. And that sympathetic tone is, I'm talking technical here for those people who are in medical field, they would know what I'm talking about. But because all medications affect the sympathetic system and all hypnosis affects the parasympathetic or the relaxed system, you have to be very careful that when you start to relax those people, the trauma can be uprooted. It can come up. So you have to be very careful about it. And if you do not feel safe or comfortable working with people who are on medication, don't do it. Refer them to someone who is experienced and who would be willing to work with them that way.
That's excellent advice, Dr. Chadha. Now, I do know for a fact that all EAPH members would always consult with a client's doctor or would, when necessary, never under any circumstances, tell a client to change their medication or
Yeah,
come off medication.
yeah,
But your advice is very well given.
yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Chadha, perhaps you would talk to us now about working online with clients. I'm presuming that you yourself are working online.
80 and 90% of my work is online currently. And people ask me if the exercises that I do or the therapy is as effective. While I see them face to face, or even if I work with them online, there is no difference. And the reason for that is whether you are working with me face to face or whether you're working with me online thousands of miles away, your body's physiology is still going to work the same way, whether you are here or there. And once we know how the body works and how we are able to guide things, it is effective. I have had clients in United States, I've had clients in Switzerland, in Sweden, in Norway, up to Australia, and all of them have done well. Some of them I've never met. Some of them were on medication, now they are medication free. So, as far as my work is concerned and my way of online therapy is concerned, there is no problem. It's equally effective.
What, in your opinion, are there any disadvantages to working with clients online?
The disadvantage that I would have would be that I can't see the expressions of the person on the person's face when they're doing therapy. I can't see the changes happening in them. That's the disadvantage. But I can see them as such on the screen. Um, that's the only disadvantage I have. But again, the other disadvantage can be that you may not know how the therapy session may have ended, and you might be confused about it, not clear about it. It's always good to do a follow-up check by just sending a text message if everything is fine. Though I've never felt the need to do that, but that is something that can be done if you are in doubt about anything as far as online sessions are concerned. But I also find that some therapists have difficulty. They are not comfortable doing online therapy sessions.
What if the client has a major abreaction?
Look, if the major abreaction has to happen afterwards, it can also happen when you are doing face-to-face therapy anyway. So the chances of having an abreaction um, after the session after online session is equal. But honestly speaking, Aiden, I've never had that experience. So it may be an unfounded fear. I've never seen abreactions happening like that.
Thank you for that, Dr. Chadha. Perhaps an idea might be to arrange with the client to get the name or address
Yeah,
of
yeah.
somebody who is close to them, and you could contact them just to see that they're okay.
Yes, yes. That would be a very good way to look at it and do things.
Thank you for that, Dr. Chadha. That was wonderful. How might somebody contact you should they want to contact you?
I use an office these days in Clare Hall. I have given up my own proper office because there was no need. COVID took away my office because all my clients had come online, and I had not used my office for 10 months. So I gave it up. But now I'm using an office in Clare Hall in Dublin, one day a month or 2 days a month. I have a website, and it's my initials, www.drpkchadha.com, drpkchadha.com. And my contact email is in that on that website, or people can also text me on phone on SMS. And my number is 353 Irish number, Irish code 353-87-410-4123. And they can text me or email me, and I respond as quickly as I can.
That was Dr. Pradeep Kumar Chadha, the Drugless Psychiatrist. Thank you, Dr. Chadha.
Thank you, Aiden. It's a pleasure again. Thank you.
You have been listening to the Professional Hypnotherapist Podcast. Please stop everything and start exploring to find solutions for you at eaph.ie.